Good evening, class. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk to you about the research proposal paper, which will be coming due here soon. And it's it's kind of the culmination of everything that you should have developed and learned throughout the class this semester. And I think there's been a little confusion about it. So I just want to clarify any of those points of confusion. So this research proposal is based upon the work that we've done throughout the semester. You started off early with your approval form through discussion posts. We've talked about several of the different areas. And you've also submitted a literature outline. Okay, so a lot of your work has already been conducted and developed for this project. A lot of it's putting it together, making sure all the questions are answered. That's provided on the assignment sheet that's been posted in your class since week 1. Your research proposal, it really is a manual in a sense, and the idea that any researcher off the street should be able to pick up your proposal and conduct your research. So I'm looking for that level of detail to see that your plan has been thought out, that your plan's consistent. If you say that there's going to be one social worker conducting the research, then your methods should fall behind or fall in that line of thinking, as far as the researcher will yada yada yada, so on and so forth. And also for participants, it's important to understand who you'll be targeting, who your sample will be, and how many of those individuals there are. So if it's a qualitative study, you're going to have a lot fewer participants than you would for an advanced, or excuse me, for a quantitative study. So you would probably provide much more detail about your snowball sample or convenience sample if you were doing a qualitative study, as opposed to a quantitative study where you would talk about maybe using random sampling techniques or other techniques that are more applicable to larger populations. So papers should be typed using the APA style, and I really suggest when you pull up your instructions, I would follow each part and make each part a subheading, and make sure that you're answering each of those questions that are a part of that area. Like, for example, if we're looking at the introduction to the statement of the problem, I would probably just put statement of the problem as my header, okay, for that area, and then use that early discussion about the description of your problem, what it is, and fill in any of the blanks that weren't addressed. And it's important to, whenever you're integrating this previous work, that you update it based upon peer feedback and any changes that have been made throughout the semester, okay? Really, I want to see a cogent, cohesive piece of work that will reflect your understanding. So make sure that you're using terminology for your techniques that are reflective in the vernacular or the word usage that you're using, okay? So is in regard to the literature review is a component of this paper. So if you look at the instructions, you'll do your title page. Make sure you're using APA formatting on that. You know, none of that fancy stuff. Just do your running header, your title, and your page number on the running header. Well, yeah, your page number on the running header. Second page should be your abstract, okay? Then the third page, that's where your paper would start with your introduction statement of the problem, your definition of terms, and then your literature review. Now, your literature review doesn't have to be 15 pages, 10 pages, 5 pages, 4 pages should be good enough. 3 to 5 pages, really. Um, uh, 4 to 5. And basically, it should say that it should show that you can speak knowledgeably about the available literature that's out there, and that part of that literature should be studies, right? So make sure that you're looking at existing studies, not only to inform that yourself on the topic and what current research has found, but also you can mimic or utilize that style in this paper. So whenever you're using those databases on InfoTrack or Sage, whatever you're accessing through the Concord database, um, make sure that you're incorporating those trends and ideas in your literature review, but also being mindful of, okay, this is how they discussed the participants. So, maybe I want to do something similar. Or this seems like a really good sampling technique. Maybe I want to use that in my study. I really want you to start thinking about that and utilizing the information that you have on hand and the information that's available from the scholars out there who have published this work in your area. Okay, so um, be sure that you've reviewed enough literature to speak knowledgeably about the topic and to integrate applicable content into your own study. Okay, you should be looking at existing studies to see how they were written. Again, to influence how you would write out your research proposal. Remember, the proposal is future tense, and a lot of the articles or research studies that you would be reading will be past tense because the proposal happens before the research. The publication that you would be reading would happen after the research. So it's important to make that delineation. So after your literature review, again, 4 to 5 pages should suffice. Then talk about your methods. I have it listed as methodology on the assignment instructions, but really it should be methods because methodology is the study of research methods, and that's not really applicable. So methods actually is a better subheader for that. And I would at least separate that subheader into 2 other sections. One entitled Participants and the other one entitled Instrumentation. But you could even do it as 3 and just follow the outline there and do the research design. There you would talk about your research question, your variables, what design you'll be using to conduct the study, and then go into your participants and instrumentation, and instrumentation as other sections. Okay, make sure that you're addressing those questions. That's what you'll be graded on. So if it asks you to describe in detail the participants that you'll use, really try to provide sufficient detail. If you're planning on doing a study in West Virginia and utilizing licensed social workers, your participants would be licensed social workers in a rural state. How would you obtain that sample? It may be through utilizing the licensure process. So those social workers who have been licensed in the state, you can get a list of those licensed social workers from the West Virginia Social Work Board, and then do a random sample based on that, or maybe a stratified sample if you want someone from each county. There are different techniques that you can use, but explain that. Make sure you're explaining, okay, if you're using licensed social workers, what is a licensed social worker? So, it could be an LSW, an LGSW, an LCSW. What are those levels? What does it take in order to be licensed? So, for an LSW, you need a 4-year social work degree, and you need to pass the ASWB exam and file an application with the board. Just make sure that you're providing that level of detail, so any reader who's not familiar with our system would be able to understand the the population that you're using. Instrumentation section, we've covered instrumentation. That was another part of a discussion. So there you'll talk about how you're going to measure your variables, okay? And that's going to vary depending on if it's qualitative or quantitative study. So make sure that you're addressing those methods and using using a method that's been outlined in your text or from another source, maybe from an article that you found where they may use a specific method that interests you, okay? Um, be sure to talk about the validity and reliability of the instrument. Now, remember, when we're talking about reliability and validity, we're not talking about the reliability of the variable itself, but in the way that we measure it, right? So, again, think about that scale example where I've set my scale back 5 pounds. So every time I step on that scale, it actually reflects 5 pounds less than what I am. It's reliable because it's giving you the same measure, but it's not really accurately measuring my weight, correct? Um, I would have to move it to 0 in order for it to actually measure my correct weight and be valid. Okay, so if you're using an existing scale, if you're using a standardized assessment, talk about that there. And I'm sure there's been articles or information, if it's a standardized scale, on its reliability and validity. Discuss that there, okay? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you can use an existing scale or an existing assessment or other tool, utilize that. Use that information that's out there, because it's better if we use um, um, something that we know is reliable and valid as opposed to not. So if you are developing your own, let's say, survey, then you'll want to explain in the instrumentation section how you designed it. What are your questions based on? Should be based on existing literature, right? Like, what have you found in the literature that solidifies the importance of asking this question? And I would also indicate that I was assessing the reliability and validity from using one of those methods as talked about in the text if you're talking about a quantitative study. Qualitative is different. You're still going to want to talk about your rationale for why you chose that question or that line of thinking based upon existing literature, but you're not going to find standardized information out there or assessments out there in order to answer that research question. So you'd be talking about triangulation in regard to the validity of the research question. And one really easy way to triangulate is to compare your findings with a known group. So you would run the assessment with your sample, but you would also have previously ran the same assessment with a group that you know to display those characteristics. So for example, if you were looking at racist tendencies, maybe you would conduct your interviews or your survey or your personalized assessment um, on a group of right right extremists or uh, uh, other other groups that have been known to have racist tendencies, like the Ku Klux Klan or something like that. Um, Granted, it's not a desirable group to interact with, but that would be a good way of comparing the results from the known group to know that, okay, this is showing that they're coming back with racist tendencies. So it fits what we know about that group, so it must be a valid instrument, as opposed to if it came back and said that there was low racism based upon assessing those group members, then you know that there's a problem with your assessment instrument. So utilizing a known group is really an effective way of triangulation. Also, you can have it reviewed by professionals. So if you designed your own scale, in pretend world, you don't really have to do this, but you could say that you triangulated your questions with 4 experts in the field. And these experts would have social work degrees and maybe have practiced in that modality, treatment modality, for quite some time. So you would explain that as a way of informing your reader of your proposal on how you were assessing the reliability and validity of the instrument. Your data collection, basically explain who is going to collect the data and how it will be collected, and provide details. So if you're doing a survey, the data will be received by the researcher. The researcher will then code the survey data into uh, um, into certain codes. Sex, male, female. You don't have to get into that level of detail, but indicate that it will be coded. Okay. Then you'll then indicate that it would be entered into some type of a computer program to do your analyses. So then you would talk about the analyses, the procedure that you would be used for data analysis. So for there, you would talk about if you were using quantitative assessment, maybe you're comparing two group means, so that would be a t-test. Um, uh, or if it's qualitative, maybe you're looking for trends or doing some type of a mapping, and you'll talk about that there. Know that we don't cover that in great depth in this course, so I'm not going to grade heavily on the accuracy of it. Did you choose the right statistical test or analysis method, as opposed to um, did you make a good knowledgeable guess? Okay, so if you can ensure that it's correct, make sure it's correct, but don't freak out about it if you're really struggling with that, because I want you to address it, but I do understand that we don't cover that in great extreme detail in this course. Hopefully you've had exposure to that in your undergraduate career, especially in a statistics course or um, another research course, but you should have a good base foundation of understanding data analysis. Limitations in your study, okay, that's the next section. And it's really important to talk about those areas that you would see as a limitation within your study. So if you were talking about something maybe highly controversial and you were doing an interview, maybe someone wouldn't want to admit to racist tendencies, or maybe they wouldn't want to admit to a criminal behavior if you were surveying about that. Or maybe the limitation would be that you used a snowball sample or a convenience sample, so it's not a random sample, so that would affect the generalizability if you were doing a quantitative study. Again, I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you um, uh, in this discussion, but really just look back through your text, look back at your notes, your existing material, maybe other lectures that I provided, and the research studies that hopefully you've been reviewing as part of your literature review, to see and understand how other people are using these um, methods. Okay, so you'll just want to talk about any limitations that you see within your study. The timeline, that would be the next section, and I want you to try to be specific in this. Okay, and it's a made-up world, but talk about the amount of time you think that it'll take to develop your instrument, and then to identify your sample, and then to reach out to your sample and get responses back from the sample, do the data analysis. Uh, just make sure that you write that out. Include your reference section, APA format. Make sure that it's on its standalone, next page. It should start on its own page. And then any appendices after that, if a consent form is needed, you can find a zillion examples online. Just make sure that you tailor it to reflect the detail of your study. And any pre or post test or survey or other assessment instrument that you use, go ahead and append that as well as Appendix B. And anything else that you might find or think would be helpful for the reviewer. Again, this paper should be about 8 to 10 pages. It should reflect the information that you're learning through the class. You've already done a lot of the work firsthand throughout the discussions and throughout the semester. So really, I know you're probably very anxious about this assignment, but don't be. We've already done a lot of the hard work. It's just making sure that you're incorporating that terminology as necessary. And always know that I'm available to help. We can schedule an appointment to talk. You can use the open discussion. But enjoy the process. Don't overthink it. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Um, Again, 8 to 10 pages. And that should include your abstract and cover page, really. Maybe not your cover, but 8 to 10 either way. If you can cover it in less and you believe that you've sufficiently met all of the criterion, then that's fine too. Just don't bog yourself down with a 30-page research proposal, okay? I just want to see that you display an understanding of the terms and concepts that we've learned throughout the semester. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I hope you've enjoyed this course. This will be your final assignment, except for the proposal, except for the presentation, which should be based off of your proposal. And I know the instructions for the presentation indicate that it should be 8 to 10 minutes in length and yada yada yada. You don't have to do a voiceover. You don't have to video yourself doing the presentation. You can just provide the slides and what you believe would be covered in 8 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops. But just basically provide an overview of your research proposal. A lot of students just discuss it by section. So just make sure that you get that presentation developed and posted in the discussion section. It's your final discussion assignment, so points will be assigned on that. So make sure that you're also providing feedback to your peers. And this is one of those cases where you don't really have to be critical in regard to the content as much as I've wanted throughout the semester, but really just look at the value added on behalf of the student and or your peer, I should say, and indicate anything that you may have learned or something that may have been interesting to you through the proposal, and it should be fine. So enjoy the last few weeks left in class. There's really not much. I'll do my best to grade in a timely fashion, but the lion's share should be done. So just I hope you've enjoyed this class and this semester. Be sure to do your instructor evaluations whenever those are emailed out. They're really important, not only for this class, but all your classes in the MSW program. We use those course instructor evaluations to determine some really important things, like are we effectively utilizing the course in a manner in which you feel like you can learn, or are there techniques that maybe we need to do that we do very well, or areas that where we need to improve. And they're also used as part of our evaluations. So it's really we really value that feedback from the student, and we want you to be an active participant in the learning process. So not only throughout the semester by doing your work, doing your discussions, participating in other events and activities, but also through assessment. Again, it's our ethical obligation to really ensure that we're doing what we should be doing as social workers. So that's no different for me as a social work professor. So I appreciate your time, and happy holidays, and take care.